Well, good evening. Good to see everyone. Good to see everyone back. It's good to be here. So, as you know, through our PM sermons, we've been walking through the book of 1 Samuel. Now we're in chapter 17, and the title of this lesson is Defiance Toward God. That's really the big idea that's going on here. Defiance toward God. Just want to remind us of the first part of the book was talking about the falling down of Hannah in a humble way and the rising up of Samuel, the prophet, who eventually transitions Saul into the picture. And that's where we are now, the last half of, not literally half, but last half of the narrative, not by size. Chapters 8 through 31 is the falling down of Saul. We're seeing his downfall already. He hasn't completely fallen all the way down, but he's on his way down in a downward spiral. And the rising of David. Right now we're in 1 Samuel chapter 17. So, key ideas, key takeaways of these 2 points. The defiance. An enemy mocks Yahweh. An enemy mocks our God, the living God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then there's a contrast there. There's someone else that is allegiant to God and faithful to God, and he's totally reliant on God. And those are the 2 things that we're going to be talking about tonight. So the defiance and the reliance. So remember in the last section, what had happened? It was about appearance. God was trying to teach everybody a lesson that it wasn't just by physical appearance. The Lord looks at the heart, and he saw that David was a man after his own heart. And ironically, we see that in this chapter, chapter 17, people are afraid because they see a really big guy. They see a really big guy and they're afraid. So, something to think about. I don't think that was coincidental. So point number 1, the defiance. And remember, so this chapter is gigantic. So I'm going to kind of do what I did this morning, because since this chapter has 58 verses, imagine me going through each verse, 3 minutes each verse, right? No. So thank you for reading the first 11 verses, Jim, that set up the scenery of this valley where the Philistines met the Israelites. And there's 2 hills. Some translations say hill, some translations say mountains. They're north and south of each other, and there's this great valley in between, and they're facing each other. And this giant guy, this massive guy, that's over 9 feet tall, wearing 125 pounds of armor, carrying a spearhead that's at least 15 pounds, is going up and mocking God's army, and saying that he's superior to them, and he's challenging them to send one warrior to defeat him. And if that one warrior defeats him, then he promises that all of the Philistines will be slaves of Israel. Now, you all are familiar with the story, and you know they didn't live up to his wager. So the next thing that happens after he challenges them is that David enters the picture, and he's shepherding as he should be, but we also know that he's going back and forth to Saul with supplies. We know that his dad is too old to battle, so the oldest 3 sons of Jesse are sent to battle. And, well, now let's talk about some key things that's going on here. Before we get into the application, I want us to really grasp, because maybe you've heard 20 sermons on this chapter, or maybe 50 sermons on this chapter. I want us to really grasp that we don't want to take the application and say, hey, there's this bully bullying me, and he's stealing my lunch money. But if I have faith like David, I could knock that bully out. Or, I'm dealing with this hardship right now. I have a rough patch in my marriage, so that's a giant in my life that I need to overcome. But if I have the faith of David, I can overcome that giant. You see? Now, if we do that, we're really minimizing the narrative of what God was really trying to show us. And it's the obvious. God is being mocked. God is on trial from an enemy. God is being defied. When you look at the repeated pattern, verse 10, and the Philistines said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. You see, verse 25, the men of Israel had said, have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come to defy Israel. And then in verse 26, same thing. David's repeating what's going on, but he says, what shall be done for the man who kills the Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? You see? Look at verse 36. This is David talking, but he says, your servant has killed both lion and bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defied the armies of the living God. And then finally, verse 45, even though we're giving away part of the story, David said to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword, with a spear, and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. See, that's what's really going on here. It's defiance toward God. God is being mocked. And so no wonder God acts. His name is at stake. His character is at stake. Now, we're not minimizing the faith of David. That's awesome. But that really is secondary to what is really going on here, you see. So another thing to think about. The people of Israel are afraid. Verse 11. Right after Goliath gives his speech. And then it happens again. Goliath gives another speech. Says something else similar. And then verse 24, the people are afraid again. But what's interesting is that David responds in a different way when he's having a conversation with Saul. He says, you don't have to be afraid. You see that contrast? These people are afraid because they see what's going on. And David's like, you don't have to be afraid, and I'll tell you why. And we're going to get into that. Another aspect is that there are people that are resenting David or doubting David, and it's the same thing as resenting and doubting God. David is relying on God, but the others are saying, nah, you can't do this. When you look at 28, verses 28 to 30, his oldest brother, as soon as David enters the scene, he's like, what's going on? Tell me what's going on. And then Eliab, verse 28, now Eliab, his oldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was aroused against David. And he said, why did you come down here? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know, look at what he says, I know your pride and insolence of your heart. You see, he thought he knew him so well. He was being very presumptuous of David's motives. Okay, but then you think of how God sees David and how God chose David, because David he's alive in this area, but was a man after God's own heart. So Eliab's assessment was incorrect. Wrong assessment, wrong motive assumption. You see that? But he's trying to talk him down. He's trying to say, this is why you're here. And he says, for you have come down to see the battle. But look at later, we see Saul do the same thing. Oh, let's read verse 32. 30 also. So David, in verse 29, says, what have I done now? Several translations say, I was just asking a question. And then in verse 30, he turns from Eliab and asks others the same question, and then they say the same thing. So he's not getting any encouragement. He's not getting any hope from these other people. They're afraid, and they're saying no. And then when he has a conversation with Saul in verse 33, Saul says this, "You're not able to go against this Philistine and fight with him. You're of youth, and he's a man of war from his youth. You don't have the experience. This is a seasoned soldier." No. NLT says you're being, NLT, the transliteration, whatever it is, paraphrase, Saul says, "You're being ridiculous. You can't beat this guy." You see? So all these people are saying, no. All these people are afraid. But David's contrasting every single one of them. David realizes that God's at stake. God's name's at stake. You see? And this is what it's really about. Not just a little guy overcoming a giant. So, as far as application goes, under this new dispensation, under this New Testament that we're under right now, this still happens in different forms. There's not necessarily a guy coming in with a spear saying, "You guys are Christians, right? And I'm going to stomp on you, and you pick your strongest Christian to fight me," right? Obviously not. But God's name is mocked. God is always put on trial by skeptics, atheists, agnostics, people that are always trying to destroy the truth, even though they can't. Now, God's truth will always prevail. It will always come to fruition. His promises will always stand. So the question is, will we be a part of that? Will we stand for that? Stand in His will and stand up for Him in the midst of all of this. See, we could choose to be passive, or we could choose to stand up for the truth. And we need to be clear about that too. How do we do that? We don't go around telling people, "You unbaptized atheist," right? Obviously, we're supposed to speak the truth in love, like the Apostle Paul says in Ephesians. We're supposed to speak with words seasoned with salt, so hearers will hear grace from our mouths. Colossians says that. That's how we're supposed to do it, not insult people. That could be misapplied if we directly applied David's language towards the enemy. But I want us to consider that. So that's kind of like a setup point. But the second point, the reliance. Look at the amazing reliance that David had. And I'm actually going to read this section right here, at least starting in verse 32. After Saul says, okay. So 32. Then David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail because of him, the Philistine. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine." And Saul said to David, "You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight him, for you are of youth, and he's a man of war from his youth." 34. And look at David's argument here. But David said to Saul, "Your servant," he's talking about himself, "used to keep his father's sheep. And when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, I went out after it and struck it and delivered the lamb from its mouth." Can you imagine that? Rescuing a lamb from a lion's mouth? Who would even want to risk that? I'd be like, "See ya, I don't want to be ya. Have fun. I'm not going to," no way. Even if I had a gun, right? That's a lot of courage right there. But he did it. "And when it arose against me, I caught it by its beard." No. "And struck it and killed it." Verse 36. "Your servant has killed both lion and bear." And you guys know about bears, hopefully. When I went to a hunter's training course when I was a kid, I was heavily warned about bears. They said, "Don't even bother running. Don't even bother. They're going to outrun you. Don't bother trying to climb a tree." And the guy that was teaching us, he was like, "This is how fast a bear can climb a tree. Don't climb the tree." You see? And then there's all these conversations about, okay, what if I have a handgun? You're dead. unless it's a 50 caliber. You need a massive weapon to take down a bear. Not David. Pretty amazing. But let's keep going. So, when a lion or bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, verse 35. Oh yeah, I already read that. Verse 36. Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, like one of the lion or the bear, seeing he has defied the armies of the living God. Verse 37. Moreover, David said, the Lord, look at, he's giving credit to God. See that? He's not saying, I'm so strong, I'm so capable, I practiced many hours my martial arts to fight these animals. He didn't say that. He says, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. See that? All glory goes to God. All credit goes to God. Yes, he said that he did these things, but then he's like, you know what? You know how I did it? God. And then finally Saul said to David, okay, go, and the Lord be with you. Not sure if he was reluctant or hesitant or skeptical still. Really doesn't matter. He just said, okay, go. And then verse 38, Saul clothed David with his armor, and he put a bronze helmet on his head. He also clothed him with a coat of mail. 39, David fastened his sword to his armor and tried to walk. But what? For he had not tested them. And David said to Saul, I cannot walk with these, for I have not tested them. So David took them off. That makes sense, right? If you're used to playing sports or even fighting, if you were a fighter, and you're not comfortable. I don't know how many sports everybody here plays. But, okay, I play tennis when I can, and I wouldn't wear a ski jacket playing tennis. That would be absolutely dumb, right? It would completely throw off everything. And I wouldn't wear hiking boots playing tennis either. It's not comfortable, so forget it. I'm just going to take it off. Makes total sense. He may have no physical protection, but we're going to see he doesn't really need it. What he needs is to be comfortable in what he's used to when he's battling bears and lions. So, verse 40. Then he took his staff in his hand, and he chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook, and put them in a shepherd's bag, and a pouch which he had, and his sling was in his hand, and he drew near the Philistine. So why smooth stones? Well, it's obvious, because they fly straight. I grew up messing around with slingshots, modern slingshots, not the actual shepherd sling. I'll talk about that in a second. You know, these slingshots, buy them at Walmart, $15. Super strong, 300 feet per second. But if I used a flat rock, it would spin off left to right, But if I used a round rock, it would go straight. See? So, don't overthink the smooth stone thing. All right. So, he drew near the Philistine, verse 41. So the Philistine came and began drawing near to David, and the man who bore the shield went before him, the Philistine's shield bearer. Verse 42. And when the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him. Oh, very similar to how his brother and the other people treated him. He disdained him, for he was only a youth, ruddy and good-looking. 43. So the Philistine said to David, Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods, little g. Verse 44. And keep that in mind, see? False gods entering the picture. Verse 44. And the Philistine said to David, Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. So David responds to him similarly. Just like the Philistine said, you come to me with sticks? Am I a dog? David says to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword? You come to me with a sword, with a spear, and with a javelin? And then look what David says he comes with. He doesn't say, I come with a slingshot and my staff. I come with my sniper skills. He didn't say that. He says, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. How's he going to win this? Verse 46, David understands this. This day, the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you and take your head from you. And this day I will give the carcasses of the camp of the Philistines to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth. For what purpose? Just because they want to show off who's stronger? Nope. What was David's motive? It says that all the earth may know there is a God in Israel. Awesome. In verse 47, then all this assembly shall know that the Lord does not save with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. All God. All glory and credit and ability to God. Don't you love that? Now remember, in Hebrews chapter 11, by faith, a bunch of people, including David, they conquered kingdoms. They overcame all of these things. But there's a phrase there that says, in weakness they were made strong. And that's what I see here in David. I mean, David's mentioned in that narrative anyways in Hebrews 11, but that's what I see. He was weak. He was little. He was too weak to carry a bunch of armor and carry a heavy sword. But he was made strong in an unsuspecting way that nobody suspected. Almost with a toy. At least that's something what the Philistine thought he was carrying. Let's keep going. Verse 48. So it was when the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, that David hurried and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. So they're in the valley, you see. Verse 49, then David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone, and he slung it and struck the Philistine in his forehead, so that the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the earth. So 50. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and struck the Philistine and killed him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. Awesome. Now, let's go back to the shepherd sling. So, regular slingshots, about 300 feet per second. Shepherd slings, 200 feet per second. Maybe 220. But they usually use ammo about like this big, instead of like this with the modern slingshots. Me and the boys, and even I showed Heather some clips of these professional shepherd slingers. And they're sniping buckets and pans and pots at least 30 yards away, maybe further. One guy was doing it across a river, and he was sniping these water jugs and all kinds of things. Dead center. I wanted to know, is it possible to be highly accurate with a shepherd sling, like we're reading here? And the answer is yes. Even now, people are doing it. And then if it's going to dent a pan deeply, like a cooking pan, yeah, it's going to kill a guy if it hits his head. Pretty awesome. Just something to think about and something for you to research. And that's how he did it, you see. But let's keep going. Verse 51. Therefore, David ran and stood over the Philistine, took his sword, drew it out of its sheath, and killed him. Now, I don't know if you're laughing like I am. Nothing wrong with it, but it's first it said he killed him in the other verse, and then it says he killed him again. That's fine, right? He killed him twice. That's I get it. It's translation. And cut off his head with it, And when the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. Wait a minute, I thought the deal was they become their slaves. No, they run. Okay, they don't run very far. Look at verse 52. Now the men of Israel and Judah arose and shouted and pursued the Philistines as far as the entrance of the valley and to the gates of Ekron. And the wounded of the Philistines fell along the road of Shaaraim, even as far as Gath and Ekron. 53. Then the children of Israel returned from chasing the Philistines, and they plundered their tents. 54. And David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his armor in his tent. Wow. So the Israelite army prevailed over the enemy army. And they were at a standstill for 40 days, it says. Goliath was like, blah, 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 whatever he's saying. I don't know exactly what he said. Blah, 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 40 days. And nobody did anything until David entered the picture. Because David understood, okay, you're going to defy my God? I'm not going to stand for this. You see? So he did something amazing. In the last section of the chapter, David's like, who is this guy? Tell me his lineage. And Abner, his commander, Saul's commander, did I say David? Sorry. Saul was asking, who's David? He's talking to Abner, his commander, and Abner saying, I don't know who it is. And then they find out, they confirm that it's the son of Jesse. And don't be confused, because yes, we know in the last chapter, he called on David, who was the son of Jesse. Just don't be confused. We already know that David went back and forth to Saul to supply him. Anyways, that's just a sub-point, not that critical right now. But let's just talk about this for now, right? Weak people are made strong for the glory of God, not for ourselves. When we look at the application today as Christians, when people try to talk us out of stuff or cause doubt in our hearts or question our faith or question what we do for God, even though we know it's what God asks of us scripturally, do we let these naysayers change our hearts? Do we let these naysayers back us down? You see? And in the midst of that, do we always acknowledge that God is all sufficient? God is all adequate, the way that David did. I mean, that's a definition of El Shaddai, all sufficient one, all sufficient God, because he is. You see? And then when we're fighting, like we brought up before, speak the truth of love, season with salt. So here's the grace of Christ, not because we have our own agenda, not because we want to be right. And that makes a whole mess. And you guys have seen it on social media or in person. It's terrible. That's not what God wants us to do. He does want us to stand up for truth, but in love, using discernment and wisdom. And finally, bringing it to Jesus. Goliath, he's out of the picture. He's gone. But there's always this super powerful, formidable enemy that we know of, and his name is Satan, the liar and the slanderer, the defier and the mocker of God. And that's what we see manifested through all the people that attempt to defy the truth. He's behind it, unfortunately. But fortunately for us, Jesus is greater than David. David was awesome, but Jesus is superior. And when we look at some parallels, before Jesus died, when he was during his ministry, yeah, the truth was defied, the truth was mocked, he was mocked, but he always stood for the truth. He always stood his ground. He did it out of love. And he was harsh with those that he needed to be harsh with the self-righteous, with the self-reliant. And he was gentle with the sinners that were truly seeking. And at the same time, when he was sent to his death, he was completely and totally reliant on God's grand plan of salvation. And there were that during that moment, yes, obviously he maintained his faith, but he was silent when he was led to the cross. You see, because that was not the time to do that. That doesn't mean he was passive. By no means he was passive. He was very active in his faith, was he not? He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew exactly what he had to do, and he did it. And I put there, words don't always prove truth. Sometimes we need to learn to keep our mouths shut. And sometimes actions speak louder than words as a Christian. You see? But he died to the point of death, even at the point of death on a cross, and he destroyed the power of the devil. That was his goal, to get rid of that defiance and give people a chance to stop defying him and start living for him and start relying on him. So Jesus, right? So, yeah. That's a perspective on 1 Samuel chapter 17, and I hope that it helps you with your faith and your walk with God, your walk with Christ. If anyone is here and has not obeyed the gospel, unfortunately, you're in defiance to the Lord right now. But you can get out of that, and you can become reliant on God. And the way that he wants you to do that is to believe, to confess him as Lord, to be baptized for the forgiveness of sins, to rise and walk in newness of life, and walk in reliance instead of defiance. So if anyone is here and has not done that, please come forward as we stand and praise him. Thank you.